In March of 2014, Ryan Stone went from small-time repeat criminal to being arrested for child abuse, attempted manslaughter, and a whole other array of charges. And the whole ordeal was one of the most watched car chases ever. He took his and numerous other people's lives in his own hands on that cold March day in 2014. And that almost unbelievable footage is coming up. This is Red Rum, stories about the true victims of crime. This video is made from various documents listed in the show notes. I use news archives, documentary footage and court documents, and so the videos are accurate to the source materials I can find. Hello, this is just a really quick one to say that this episode is a bonus. I'm adding it to be on top of the normal content because it is a little bit different. But I watched this cop cam footage and I just couldn't take my eyes off of it. It's got millions of views, and so I wanted to share that with you and give you a little overview of what this whole case is about. Enjoy. Ryan Stone was 28 years old in March 2014 when he decided to add to his already long criminal record. Ryan was no stranger to prison, and after turning 18 in 2004, he was arrested. And in 2005, he was arrested again. And then in 2006, 7, 8, 9, 11, 12, and then this crime happened. And after this one, there was no way that the judge was just gonna let him walk home after a short sentence. He'd been in prison for a real array of crimes, including possession of controlled substances, driving under the influence, weapon possession, and assaulting a custody officer. In October of 2013, Ryan was released from prison, and after a 4-year drug sentence, he was glad to get out. But then in February of 2014, Ryan was actually still under surveillance by the authorities because they suspected that he was still on drugs. And this time they thought he wasn't just using, but they suspected he was also dealing them. The police hadn't found enough evidence to actually bring Ryan in, but it would turn out that they wouldn't need to, because on the 12th of March 2014, he managed to get himself into trouble that well outweighed any of his previous charges or convictions. It was at 6:20 a.m. that morning that Ryan approached a small shop or convenience store in Longmont, Colorado. He was inside that convenience store when he saw a woman, later identified as Martha Rodriguez, walk up to the store. She got out of her car and she went into the shop to buy coffee. Now, because she was just popping out of her car to get a quick coffee, Martha left her car running and the keys in the ignition. But of course, Ryan had seen this. He had been watching her. And so as soon as she popped out of the car, he headed out of the convenience store. He actually walked past her on her way in, and he walked out of that store, got into the car, and immediately drove off. Now, what he didn't realise until he started driving was that he wasn't alone in the car. In the back seat of Martha's car was her 4-year-old son, Alan. So now Ryan's on the run, but not only as a carjacker, but also as a kidnapper. Of course, Martha called the police immediately and she reported this, obviously extremely urgent crime, and police were quick to start dealing with this. Now, although they were quick, they took some time to find Ryan. He was driving for quite some time. And by the time he was located by police, it had been an hour and a half. And at this point, no doubt, Ryan knows that he's done something wrong. There are police cars following him. There's also helicopters at this point circling above him. And he knows he's in trouble. So he makes the decision to try and pull away really fast and come to a stop in front of a grey car that was going the same way as him. This action forced the car to have to stop, and Ryan jumps straight out of the red car he hijacked earlier and leaves Alan, the 4-year-old boy, sitting unhurt in the back seat. And Ryan's really quick when he does this. So he manages to go to the driver's side of the Goldie grey car that's now stopped behind him. And he pulls open the driver door and he forces that driver out and onto the ground next to the car. Now, as he does this, the woman who's a passenger in the car grabs her handbag and she just gets out the car, running across around the car to the grassy side of the road. Only a few seconds passes between Ryan forcing that car to stop, and by now he is in it and he is speeding off down the road. Now, by this point, word had gotten out to local law enforcement, and so there were a number of officers making their way to nearby areas just to try and stop Ryan in any way they could. And one of those officers was Officer He. And he was already out attempting to stop Ryan. And his way of attempting to stop was that he'd stationed himself a little way ahead of Ryan. And he had got this spike strip that he'd put down on the road. Now, this is all happening very fast. And he's in the process of putting the last bit down. And Ryan sees this and he manages to verge to the right. But Officer He is literally standing at that point of the road. And so as Ryan dodges that spike strip, he rams into the officer and he is travelling incredibly fast. Officer He is knocked over further to the right and he suffers severe injuries to both of his legs and his feet. In fact, Officer He suffered injuries where his leg was shattered in 20 places, and because of that he had to have several surgeries. And a prosecutor later said that if Officer He had been hit in any other way, then he would have been killed and Ryan would have murder on his charges. Now back to this car chase, and Ryan continues along the same road, getting up to 100 miles an hour before eventually targeting another car. And this car's driven by Zune Wharton. Now, she does actually pull over, later stating that she thought that what had just happened was some kind of minor car accident. She'd get out of the car, the pair would exchange details and they'd be on their way. Now, Ryan manages, when Zune's car is stopped, to open her driver's side door and pull her out of the car before he jumps in and drives off. And not long after that, Ryan continues his high-speed chase with police vehicles gaining on him every minute that passes. He approaches this junction up ahead. He knows the police cars and the sirens and the flashing lights are behind him. They're coming closer and closer. And so he makes the decision to run that red light and he continues forward at a high speed. But of course, as he does this, there's a lot of traffic crossing the junction and that continues forward. And Ryan slams into one of the cars before his car actually spins round and he gets straight out. After that, he attempts to carjack another car that stopped as part of that collision, but he wasn't actually able to open the door. And so he just sort of runs around the car and back towards the way that he came. Now, soon after that, he actually does manage to find a building with a car park and a back area. And he manages to get to the back of that and he attempts to climb over the fence, but it's just too high for him and there's nothing to put his feet on. And so he falls back down onto the floor. And it's just seconds after that that Ryan lies down on the ground and surrenders and the police arrest him. He knows there's nothing he can do. Now, instead of going to the police station, they actually decide to head straight to the hospital to treat Ryan for a suspected drug overdose. The tests that then come back later show that he's going to be fine, but they do show that in his system he has meth, marijuana and lorazepam, and they're in quite large amounts. Ryan was charged and placed into jail to await his trial. And during this time waiting for his trial, Ryan became aware that footage of this high-speed police chase had been put online and had been shown by various news outlets from across the world. And he's not sad about this. In fact, he's pretty happy about this. He's pretty proud of this.
Yeah, my lawyer told me I made the news in the UK and Australia. You get paid by YouTube. So, Channel 7 News, I believe, is going to be the one that gets paid for that. Well, I'm going to contact Channel 7 News.
The trial went ahead And Ryan's defense was basically that Ryan had been so high on drugs that he was delusional and hadn't known what he was doing. But when the judge learnt that this was the way that the defense was planning on going, the judge forbade intoxication being used at trial as a defense. And to be honest, it wasn't hard for the prosecution to show the jury exactly what kind of a person Ryan was. There was that phone call, that prison visitor video that they were actually allowed to show in court. And so the whole courtroom got to see how unremorseful Ryan really was. Ultimately, Ryan was found guilty of attempted manslaughter. He was found guilty of robbery, of child abuse, and that child abuse was to do with the kidnapping of little Alan. And he was found guilty of even more charges. Now, Ryan's family said that he's a compassionate person who did really feel remorse for his actions. But, of course, the court didn't believe that. In part, that's because of that prison visitor video, which of course happened after he's been in prison for a while. But the court just didn't think that Ryan showed any remorse when he was sitting there at trial. After being found guilty, Ryan, who was just 30 years old at the time of sentencing, was sentenced to 160 years in prison with chance of parole after 75 years. Now, this might seem like a really harsh sentence, especially given what we've seen as some of the sentences that have come across on Red Rum, and they're for much deadlier crimes and for much shorter time. But the judge was determined in this instance to impress on Ryan the weight of his crimes. He said that he's lucky that the Officer He, didn't suffer more from his injuries and that he wasn't killed, and that other people weren't killed in the process. Thank you for watching this episode of Red Rum. Don't forget to leave your case suggestions down below in the comments on YouTube or on Spotify Q&A, or you can just message me on Instagram as well, or Twitter or Facebook, and I will add them to my list. Other than that, I will see you next week for another episode of Red Rum. Bye.